I'd like to start out by saying this is my current favorite single-player game. As such, sometimes what I say about it is praise, and other times it is more critical. But even the critical stuff comes from a place of deep examination of the game's systems, world building, the decision making of the company, and the nuances that result. That being said, the goal with harsher criticism is never to gripe, but rather shine a spotlight on the direct effect certain systems and decisions has on the player's engagement, good or bad. There's nothing wrong with doing this. It should be encouraged for anything a person enjoys, not just a video game. Examine the things you enjoy, look at what makes it tick beneath, and seek a deeper understanding of why you do, or don't, enjoy something to the fullest, or even why you just do or don't enjoy parts of the whole. All said, let's talk about the open world relevancy of older regions. Every now and then, I'll take a stroll through one of the older regions just for old time's sake. There's never really an objective-based reason anymore when I do this, unless there's an event going on. But I think it speaks to a kind of subconscious longing I have to truly experience the entirety of the open world in a simultaneous fashion, as I have done in other open world games that are complete from the start. As a day one veteran of this game who rarely if ever took a day off throughout the first 2 years and only missed about 3 or 4 months during the third year, being able to experience the entirety of the open world in a simultaneous fashion is something I've never really had the opportunity to do. The closest to it I could possibly say would be the earliest days of the game, when we had base Mondstadt and liyue simultaneously, with Mondstadt's Dragonspine releasing shortly after. We could travel back and forth from Mondstadt to liyue as we pleased, and the entirety of the world for what it was at that time was truly open to us. By the time the first 3 Inazuma Islands released, I had largely cleaned up base Mondstadt and liyue. There were a few straggling objectives or quests out there left to do in the older regions, but by and far, I had completed those regions for all their main content. Statues maxed, all regions displaying map completion rates of the high 90%, if not straight up 100%, reputation rewards all acquired, and this is with me having started the game over from scratch around 1.2, after having a firmer grasp of the game's ecosystems and meta. It wasn't until somewhere around Kokomi's release, I was in Inazuma and friends had just started the game. Excited to have some friends now experiencing the same game as I decided to co-op with them to help with domains, overworld bosses, etc. But that's when I realized just how much of the physical open world was irrelevant to me at that point. I hadn't actually walked through Mondstadt or liyue for anything in a long, long time. When Mondstadt and liyue were the only regions, there was no map from the past for me to look back on. But with Inazuma, now there was. As time went on and more regions opened up, Inazuma, the Chasm, Sumeru, I noticed that my friends were playing a very different game than I was. I was for the most part staying up to date with the most recent updates and events, gated hard every couple of patches or so, whereas my friends were truly experiencing the world in a true open world fashion. Obviously, the experiences between older and newer players would be different, but there seemed to be something way more fundamentally different than just early game versus late game player experiences. The actual core gameplay seemed different, and after thinking about it, one of the main reasons I came up with was that my world was being depleted in timed segments, whereas the entire world was open to them from the beginning, barring Inazuma. But they got there soon enough as well after a few days of rushing quests just to unlock the nation. I have to admit, I was a little envious, especially at the onset of Sumeru. Here they were, lost in Liyue one day, exploring the Sumeru jungles the next, bouncing around Inazuma the next, whereas I had one single area to explore, the new Sumeru jungles. As an open world game, the open world meant something entirely different to me than it did to my friends, and I had to wonder if maybe joining the game later wasn't the best way to start the game. From an immersive experience standpoint, that is. But at the core, what separated these experiences? I think the first couple of factors, above all others, is a combination of no loot respawns, coupled with sectioned and timed map releases. For those who do have high clearance rates in some regions, have you ever been wandering the open world in one of the older regions and come across a chest? And you just think to yourself, wow, this is still out here after all this time. For that fleeting moment, the area around you feels alive again. And I think that's due to how inextricably linked chests are to the feeling of successful exploration. Whether it's wide open chests for the taking, or rune-locked chests in the keep of a mob, chests are one of the main markers of untapped territory, if not the main marker. And I think when we come across chests we somehow missed before, it feeds into the player psychologically. In a world so beautiful and well crafted, where exploration is one of the main draws for many players such as myself, we want there to be more. We don't want to think we've seen it all. But as the mobs dwindle in an area, so comes our realization that one of our main draws, the exploration, isn't limitless. That one little chest, psychologically, it's affirmation that there's still some magic left. Or at least that's how I feel. That other factor I mentioned is timed map releases. I've played my fair share of open world games, and most are in an already finished state from the start, or at least close to it. If there are updates to them, they are complementary to the game, rather than part of the main game itself. You can start out in any direction, north, south, east, west, and basically tackle the map as you wish. It's kind of like what base Mondstadt and Liyue were. However, from Liyue on, it pointed us directly to the next region. Essentially, what this means is that despite the world being open, there's a moderately linear way to how consistent veteran players had to approach it. By the time Sumeru released, Inazuma was cleaned up almost as much as Mondstadt and Liyue were at the end of the first year. No surprise that Sumeru ended the same way as Fontaine approached. Veteran players are playing on the edge of content and exploration. More does steadily come, but with consistent play, you can hit a content wall. I have some conflicting feelings about this. In my "The Sumeru Desert is actually great" essay, I mentioned how the large desert was used to dwarf the player, but how that in return makes it feel all the more accomplished when you clean the desert out. That still holds true, at least for me. When I look at my desert map and see those 100%, I think to myself, wow, I really conquered all that. But that does come with the price that I can't experience the desert ever again in the same way. My incentives for tracing back through those great halls and magnificent dunes are non-existent today. For all it's worth, the regions could have released as instances rather than part of a seamless open world. After all, it had happened twice already. Inkonomia and the Chasm were two additional regions added to the game, But unlike the main map, they were added as completely separate instances. And it worked. I thought they were handled perfectly. But I also can't tell you the last time I've had to go back to either region. And the more I think about it, that's the same I feel about a lot of the main map as a veteran player who has cleared 90% of it. I can't pick on Inazuma or the Chasm for this. It's not like I'm strolling through Mondstadt or Liyue or Inazuma every day either. My point? What am I getting at? What am I saying all this to say? I think it's telling. If there's an open world where the majority of the map feels like it could be instanced rather than connected, the question becomes what's making it feel that way. And it largely goes back to the factors I mentioned. Clearing out non-responding loot camps and timed map releases. Rather than one large open world, the feeling we get is really more so that we've played around in several small open worlds. Rather than head out towards Sumeru from the start, then to Liyue, then to Fontaine, then Inazuma, and go as we please in any order we want, we were guided year by year on how our stop should progress, leaving us to finish up one region before the next. And largely dry up all the loot, quests, and rewards of those regions in the process. Which is cool, but aside from the beautiful vistas, and they are beautiful, for someone who has cleared out past regions, it kind of leaves little purpose for the open world. For newer players, the entire map has daily relevancy, as long as they never hit the content wall, which, as the game grows, becomes harder for a new player to truly do. Not impossible, but harder. However, for consistent veteran players playing at the edge of content, the rest of the map is just there. We are playing different games. It's kind of a weird concept, isn't it? We're technically playing the same game, but what's new and open to a new player is completely different than that of myself, which naturally, fundamentally shapes our respective perspectives of the game. Try saying respective perspective 5 times fast. They get to backtrack all the lands as they please, approaching things in a truly open world way, sometimes even getting overwhelmed with just how many options there are. That's not to say we don't ever visit old regions as veteran players, but it's largely in superficial ways. For instance, you could argue that particular artifact, weapon, or talent book domains require you to return to old regions, giving them purpose. But that's largely undercut by the fact that those domains are, 1, instances, and 2, you can teleport right to them. Yes, in the literal sense, you are traveling to an old region when you enter one of those old domains, but is the overworld relevant when you do that? I would have to say no. Despite there being a domain at the top of Dragonspine and one under the sea in Fontaine, what you do to get to both of them is the same. You open your map and you teleport, which really makes it irrelevant from an overworld standpoint where the domains even are. As well, some incentives of these domains become available by other means. For the benefit of a doubt, the ability to teleport to domains out of the picture, even if you did count the Emblem of Severed Fate and Shimenawa domain as giving Yashiori Island permanent overworld relevancy, we can now craft those artifacts. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm very happy to be able to do that, but it does further diminish one of the only reasons for visiting old locations. Woo, I've said a lot. But I'm saying all that to say what? I think the game could benefit from giving the overworld a little more replayability. Don't get me wrong at all, this has been my favorite adventure game in ages.
This is great.
I love it. The story, the lore, the characters, the gameplay, character building. Not so much the gacha, but nothing's perfect. And I also love the game world itself. But as an open world, I admit, I want it to feel a little more replayable in some regions. I wanted it to give me a little more incentive for backtracking on foot. Something there in Duhua Marsh to breathe life into Liyue. Something on Star Snatch Cliff to incentivize me to go up there. You know, there's actually something that strikes me in this game that was only done once and never again. Andreas, Dominator of the Wolves, is the only weekly boss that you could just run up on in the actual overworld. That's awesome. I understand why some other weekly bosses didn't do this, such as Dvalin. He has a unique playing field that just kind of requires a separate instance. But I'm not arguing that all weekly bosses should be this way. My point is how it breathes some air into the sector of Mondstadt. And not only that, but to get to Andreas, you have to trek a little bit. Some find the trek annoying, but personally, as the only pathing through an old region that feels required, I'll take it, I'll accept it. It's just too bad I don't really have to ever fight Andreas anymore. Like, ever. Which ties back into itself, honestly, because isn't that one of the draws of an open world? Again, I could be speaking mostly for myself, but I like replayability and purpose. The majestic dragon spine can be seen all over the map, a landmark recognizable from any high point. It's there, all big and awesome, but that's kind of all it's doing. Sitting there looking big and awesome. I can't say the last time I've been incentivized to climb it outside of a limited event. I guess if I'm going to be fair about this breakdown, I do have to point out limited events though. They do breathe more life to older regions than anything else. Oftentimes, these events make use of the actual overworld too, which is great. Lantern Rite will be coming up soon, and that will have us visiting Liyue Harbor. It's worth noting though, that along with it comes Chenyu Vale, a completely new Liyue area. How much of old base Liyue will be used during Lantern Rite? That's the question. I hope at least some of it will be used, just for old time's sake. But even if so, that comes with the understanding that it would just be temporary while the event lasts. Afterwards, we would be right back to the majority of Liyue not having a huge purpose anymore. Look, I think my point is made. I don't want to hammer on the game I love so much. After all, I do love it. But it's because I love it that I criticize the points that I think could use some work too. That said, I feel an obligation to offer up some ideas of what I think could help breathe some life into older, barren regions that we just don't ever walk across anymore. So, here are some thoughts, and I believe I can tie it together with something that's already in the game. Reputation is a perfect way of breathing some life into older regions and giving them some modern-day relevancy. I would even say that they could tie this in with the local legends concept introduced in Fontaine. Imagine, introduce some uniquely strong enemies into older regions, put some weekly reputation commissions behind them, with some new obtainable rewards or cosmetics, and boom, you have a reason to visit Bright Crown Mountains again to get absolutely washed by the three-eyed eye of the storm. They could increase the reputation levels and make people want to go back to these regions to accomplish more, but also at the end of the line, put something there to keep it going. Like what? Well, the game does have an enemy kill counter in the archives. How about that? Particular name cards or teapot decoratives could be given out for all to see, with your number of kills for that enemy attached to it. Now everyone knows you're the great local legend Kairagi Slayer. Heck, maybe you can even get a Kairagi mask for the Traveler after 12 weeks of local legend overworld Kairagi takedowns. And for those who aren't strong enough to do it, after 24 attempts, takedown or not. You get one shot at this per region a week, so make the best of it. As for other ideas, I'm not going to say respawn old chests, that's low-hanging fruit. But they could respawn special local mobs, which give extra EXP and friendship EXP to all party members who belong to that region. Want to finally get your level 10 friendship Amber? Run around and kill the special EXP mobs throughout Mondstadt with her. It doesn't even have to be an extreme amount of EXP, but just something to give people some encouragement to run through Mondstadt again and hunt. And if you don't want to do it, it's not something you're heavily missing out on, such as a Prima Gem handout. We kind of have this with the random blue star encounters, but a more purposeful direct system specifically tailored to make you want to use specific characters in specific regions is what I'm talking about. Do it as a free daily or weekly purple ley lines as opposed to the blue and gold ley lines that cost resin. They could change location and only a couple could spawn a day or per week, but it could be there for those who'd like a little extra friendship points. And it could be an incentive for you to go back to those regions. I don't know, I'm really just thinking off the top of my head now. Really, when it's all said and done, the game is still great regardless, and everything I'm saying is just personal taste and opinion. And honestly, admittedly, the game has sped up a lot in the past year as far as expansions go. I never could have imagined 3 desert region expansions in one regional cycle. And now Fontaine has an expansion, and liyue will be getting an expansion with Chinyu Vale. The game is expanding way faster than it did at the start. The point being, it's become harder and harder to hit that content wall, because more quests and exploration are being thrown out there before I can even get to it. I'm not running out of chests, quests, and things to do as much as I did in the earliest days, so maybe this isn't as big of an issue as the older days, but it still does exist as an issue, just with less severity. And hey, the game does offer some reasons to go back to older regions, albeit circumstantial ones. For one, if you get a character that is from an old region, chances are you're going to have to go back to those regions and fight one of the bosses. Maybe it's the Pyro-Regisvine, or who knows, the Geo-Hypostasis, or Magukenki, who knows. But we do have to do that in that case, and hey, that's something, right? As well, one thing I did note that made me pretty happy when The Wanderer came out in Sumeru was the fact that, sure, while his talent books did come from Sumeru, his material was the handguards from Inazuma. I actually had to go back to Inazuma to farm several handguards because, well, I thought I was done doing that. But this mixed itemization here from different regions, I think that we should have a lot more of that to keep us bouncing from region to region. These things said, though, they are still circumstantial reasons. It really depends on you having the characters. But hey, again, it's something, right? I just feel an open world has so much potential for replayability. Especially an open world as pretty as this one, with mountains, valleys, deserts, jungles, beaches, islands, caves. The awe of seeing these areas for the first time is not lost to me. But I'm not really talking from a place of nostalgia, so much as just wanting to play through and appreciate this world as one single instance world. Similar to the experience my new player friends had back when they joined. I can't even imagine map replayability ever crossing the mind of players joining this year, or next year, or beyond, because they'll have so much to do they'll never clear out older regions in the first place, but have so much ahead of them they'll never hit a content wall. Or at least it will take them a long time to do it. Just endless fun and exploration. An amazing thought. There will be a day in which we see everything in this game for a final time, though that day may be years and years out. All good things do come to an end after all. For the time we're here though, I want to continue to appreciate the beauty of this open world, both new and old, as one package. As I said earlier, we're all playing the same game, but we're all playing a different game here, and for different reasons. Even if older regions don't ever obtain replayable relevancy, it's not going to make me hate the game or stop playing it. There's a lot to like in the total package. So yeah, for now, I'll still just appreciate what is here, before it's all gone for good. One of the easiest ways to miss the good in something is to fret over the things that it isn't. And to get my nostalgic kicks for old regions, maybe I'll settle for the occasional random chest on my completely random walks. Thanks for listening.
Is this an answer from this world?